and then we will jump right in. Bishop Mitchell presides over the Sixth Episcopal District of the AME Church, which encompasses all of Georgia. Bishop, will you lead us in a word of prayer?
Thank you so very much, Representative Taylor. Let us pray. Gracious God, we pause today to first give thanks to you for blessing us to have this time together. God, in this moment, we acknowledge your presence and we seek your guidance. We thank you for the freedom to gather, to speak, to listen, and to engage in the important matters that shapes our community, that shapes our nation, but most of all, shape our world. God, as we gather on this virtual platform for this special election runoff forum, I pray that you would grant us the wisdom to speak with clarity, to listen with empathy, and to lead with integrity. Remind us, God, that leadership is a sacred trust and that the decisions made affect the lives of so many. Help us, dear God, to move beyond division and toward unity. Teach us to value not just our own positions, but the dignity and worth of every person, those who agree with us and those who do not. May we pursue justice, uphold truth, act in the interest of all people toward the common good. Bless these two candidates, God, who is offering themselves for service. I pray, God, that you will bless every voter. I pray that you will bless every leader and every citizen. Keep us mindful that true power, ultimately authority, rests in you. I pray, God, that you would grant us courage, grant us passion, and grant us a spirit of cooperation. May our work tonight, God, be seasoned with grace. And may our actions bring honor to you and benefit to all. God, we pray this in your wonderful name. Now, God, bless this forum, bless your people, bless Representative Taylor and all those who she represents. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Thank
Okay.
you.
I
Blessings.
have 10 fielded questions from various leaders throughout the state that I will offer. But attendees, if you have a question that has not already been presented or listed in the question Q&A, use the Q&A for me. That's what I'm learning on, the Q&A, okay? Please place it in that section and we will include as many as time allows. So here's the deal. Both candidates will have the same question and you will have 2 minutes to answer and or respond. And then there will be a 2 minute closing statement from each of you. Thank you again, candidates. Thank you, attendees, for signing on to be informed. And here is the first question. I didn't toss up a quarter or to see who would go first, but let's just do ladies first. How about that? What specific skills and experience do you bring to the commission that will enable you to effectively serve the people of Georgia? Ms. Waits?
Thank you, Representative Taylor. I think I'm uniquely qualified in the sense that I've spent the last 15 years serving with the federal government. I started with the Small Business Administration writing disaster assistance loans for businesses and or corporations that had been impacted by natural and as well as man-made disasters such as the BP oil spill, Katrina, and so forth. Following that, I joined FEMA, where I spent 10 years on the road traveling, helping families to recover and put their lives back together, again, following natural disasters. I had the amazing privilege of serving in the Georgia House of Representatives for 3 terms, working across the aisle, working with another 179 other members, like yourself, Representative, from all different parts of the state, from individuals who did not look like me, who did not think like me, but nonetheless, we were successful in passing legislation from all different sorts, such as House Bill 54, which provided tuition to the children and dependents of fallen heroes and first responders. Many of you right now should not be on your cell phones while you are driving because of my efforts. Representative Ron Mayo and I authored that legislation. It passed the year after I moved on to run for higher office in hands-free driving, which Representative Carson passed the legislation. And we can go on with a plethora plethora of other pieces of legislation. I worked with CEO Lorraine Cochran Johnson, where she passed a legislation in DeKalb where we required cameras and lighting at gas stations throughout the city of Atlanta during my tenure on the Atlanta City Council. And after leaving the Georgia House, we went over to the Atlanta City Council and took on some issues that impacted us here at the local level. But I don't want to hold the floor too long, but I have a set of unique experiences that I think will be critical to the success of this particular opportunity.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Hubbard, same question. What specific skills and experience do you bring to the commission, or will you bring to the commission, that will enable you to effectively serve the people of Georgia?
Yeah, thank you, Representative Taylor and Bishop Mitchell. And I love this question because the qualifications that I bring to this race are that I have been down in front of the Public Service Commission now for the last 6 years. That's the full term of a commissioner, doing the work of advocating for lower power bills, clean energy resources to transition us to that future that we all need for our children, a clean planet and healthy future. And I bring 15 years of energy expertise and industry experience. And so what that means is that when it comes to all of the different ways that Georgia Power Company and the commission, that are 5 Republicans, are raising our power bills and locking those high power bills into place, I know exactly where we can reduce those power bills, how we can push back on those types of things. And I'll just give you one simple example. Just today, the rate increase was locked into place, these 6 rate increases we've seen over the last 2 years. And the commission met today to lock in those rates. And we know that the company, the monopoly utility, earns a far higher rate of return on the power plants they built than the rest of the market. So that's an immediate area where, as a commissioner, I can come in and start to make change to push power prices and our power bills down. And so that's what I bring to this commission, is that expertise to hit the ground running right from the start.
Okay, let me stop my little timer. Number two.
Representative Taylor, at the appropriate time, Mr. Hubbard has talked about this 15 years. He's spoken about that a lot, and I've yet to hear what the actual 15 years of experience is. And I'm a little curious. So at the appropriate time in this forum, I'd like to ask him, what 15 years of experience do you bring? And secondly, does public comment, is that the equivalent of public service at a meeting? I'm just curious about that. Thank you, Representative.
Mr. Hubbard?
I'd be happy to. So in that 15 years of direct energy experience that Ms. Waits does not have, and so she can't answer the question of how rates are set, what I've done is actually put together a plan for Georgia on what we should be building and what we should be retiring in terms of the clean energy resources and the coal plants and that sort of thing. That's all been published on my nonprofit website that I founded 6 years ago to be able to intervene as an expert energy witness before the commission. And so it's not just public comment. I put together an actual integrated resource plan. I have a clear plan for how to transition us to clean energy and drive down power prices. That's what energy expertise means. It's being able to hit the ground running and not have to learn on the job, as my opponent will have to do, because she does not have any experience in this industry at all.
Okay.
Thank you, Representative.
Moving on. What is the most important issue facing the Georgia Public Service Commission today, and how would you address it? And we'll stay with Mr. Hubbard.
It's a great question. I would say that the greatest issue that we have right now is a lack of accountability and a lack of transparency and a lack of responsibility on the part of the Public Service Commission to the public, right? It's right there in the name, and yet they're serving their corporate interests. And so I think that's incredibly important, because transparency is something that we have not yet seen on this commission. That's something that I've been very transparent about my funding, where my expenses and where my campaign donations are coming from. We can't say that about the person in this primary runoff. And so I think transparency is incredibly important. And I would like us to stay focused on that, because that's what we need for the Public Service Commission, and that's what I intend to bring.
Okay. Ms. Waits, you have a rebuttal?
Well, before I give my remarks in terms of what I actually offer in terms of real service, he made a statement about where my funding comes from. We're all required to file campaign expense reports. So I'm not really clear about what he means, because I filed my report on time, which I'm sure you looked at it as I have looked at yours. So Peter, when you make statements, let's make sure that we're being honest and transparent, which we've had a big problem with that in this race. Miss Taylor, may I begin my remarks?
Absolutely.
So ethics is a big problem in this. And for those who do not know, because they have never served, the Georgia General Assembly requires that you not take any funding during the legislative session, which you can attest to.
That's
I've
correct.
never seen a dynamic where the individuals who actually have oversight over a committee are allowed to take funding from the very individuals that they regulate. So that's the first thing, is ethics. The second thing I think that's important is when you look at the cost overruns from Plant Vogel, which Mr. Hubbard has so eloquently talked about, which again he has no expertise because I have yet to see anything in terms of the organizations, the nonprofits. None of them are registered with the state of Georgia in terms of collecting any funds. So these are obviously fraudulent and fake nonprofits. But nonetheless, transparency and honesty I think will be very important. During COVID, we were allowed to place a moratorium on shutoffs and disconnects in Georgia during the 2020 sessions, which I'm sure he doesn't know anything about. But again, I would like to see that put in place again for individuals and families who have health challenges, as well as seniors who are on fixed income. And so I'd like to go back to a tiered rate system to help those families who are struggling the most with these colossal and skyrocketing bills. Lastly, we've already talked about the need for transparency. When you look at the way that the Public Service Commission operates, it's almost like a secret, clandestine type environment. And so we want to make sure that we get information to consumers in terms of rate hikes, in terms of how rates are set, which is one of the reasons that I made a decision to put that on my website as well as on all social media so that individuals will be informed. And so, again, I look forward to a robust conversation tonight.
Okay, let me stop. All righty, we are moving along. Number 3, if elected, what will be your top 2 or 3 priorities? Ms. Waits, we'll hang with you for a minute, a little
Oh,
longer.
lovely, lovely, lovely. So I look forward to working with my former colleagues in the Georgia General Assembly because they have the power to actually put rules in place that will require the individuals, the PSC members, not to take any funding whatsoever from the individuals that they have oversight of, as well as they make decisions and have votes upon. So that's the first piece. Senate Bill 34, I thought was very important because it would have placed a moratorium on data centers to allow us to figure out and set proposed rates. Because, as all of us know, data centers pay far less than average consumers. And then the last piece is a tiered rate system that protects working families, that protects senior citizens, as well as those who have health challenges who may be having issues with paying these skyrocketing colossal bills.
Okay. Mr. Hubbard, same question. If elected, what will be your top 2 or 3 priorities?
Yeah, absolutely. So the top priority is putting downward, lowering our power bills by providing relief to those people that have been feeling the pinch on these rising power bills. And so that's the very first thing that I'll do. Pardon me, I'm also doing double duty on with my children, so I was just running to attend to them for a moment. So it really has to do with pushing back on the extraction of wealth that Georgia Power Company is doing on the backs of us. So they're allowing data centers to come into our communities. We're paying for those. And so pushing back on that is going to be the number one priority. And then the second priority will be to put forward the power plan that I've already published on what we should be building and how should we be retiring coal plants. And so that's a very important component. Those are 2 things that I intend to put forward. There's many other things, including model legislation. The state of Minneapolis, excuse me, Minnesota rather, has a very robust community solar garden legislation that I intend to promulgate. So there's lots of good opportunities, but reversing the upward increase in power bills is the number one priority, and I have a plan for that.
Thank you so much. We'll let you catch your breath for a second there, and we will send the next question over to Ms. Waits. How will you, Ms. Waits, ensure transparency and accountability in the commission's decision-making process, especially regarding rate increases, huge unlimited campaign contributions, and other significant policy decisions?
Well, I can't speak for everybody in this race, but I think most of us did make a pledge to not take any funding whatsoever from utility companies. So that's the first start right there. We start with ethics, and I'm extremely proud of that, and as well as my opponent who has made that pledge. But honesty and integrity, I think, is going to be the best solution in this particular race. Senate Bill 34 would have placed a moratorium, which I think is going to be important. And then lastly, to make sure we have an audit in terms of how we are spending funding. Georgia Power has a cap for profits of 11.9%. That's actually higher than most in the nation. And so when we look at how Georgia Power sets rates in relationship to the freeze that Mr. Hubbard has talked about, essentially the consumer has picked up the tab when you look at all of the increases, the three rate hikes the 6 rate hikes in a 2-year period of time. We picked up the tab on that. When you look at the 40% reduction that data centers pay nationwide, consumers, you and I, have picked up the tab on that. And so I would be asking questions, asking for an audit in terms of how we're spending funding. And then lastly, let's go back to the $35 billion cost overrun that was placed onto you and I for Plant Vogtle. I don't know any business and or corporation that can function when they have a $35 billion cost overrun and be successful. So I support fully a performance-based system, whereas you're not rewarded with a profit if you have not performed in a way that benefits the consumer. Last, I am not anti-tech. I'm not anti-business. I have no problem with Georgia Power making a profit, but we have to balance consumer needs versus that of business needs. And that has not happened in the state of Georgia for the last 2 decades.
Okay. Mr. Hubbard, I'll repeat the question. How will you ensure transparency and accountability in the commission's decision-making process, especially regarding rate increases, huge unlimited campaign contributions, and other significant policy decisions?
It's a very large question, but transparency has been at the core of what I've been doing. So I mentioned the integrated resource plan that I prepared that is as detailed as what Georgia Power has put out there. The difference between what I've done and what Georgia Power has done is that I've published all of that work, all the receipts, all the homework. That's all available for verification. So it's really very transparent from that point of view. Now, in the 6 years that I've been before the commission, I've been able to see where they're spending their money. An audit would be nice, but we already know where that money is going. We see how it's flowing to the affiliates of Georgia Power Company who own natural gas pipelines. We see those areas where it's flowing. And so, transparency is going to be incredibly important. I am the only candidate in this runoff that has not accepted Georgia Power Company money in the past. And so I think that's incredibly important to make sure that it remains that way, because we need commissioners who do not take money from the companies they regulate. And the 5 commissioners that we have now are accepting an enormous amount of money from the companies they regulate. So that transparency will be absolutely critical to maintain the faith and trust of the public as a public service commissioner.
Okay. And I'm just going to remind everyone again, if you have questions, please put it in the Q&A and we'll circle back around to those. The next question is...
Ms. Taylor, there was a statement that was made that he was the only candidate that has not accepted any funding from utility companies. And I wanted to correct the record tonight and indicate it's my understanding that none of us, Mr. Hubbard, have accepted any funding in this race when you look at all of our disclosures. And so when we make statements, we want to make sure that they are factual.
Question number 5, what specific programs would you support to help low-income Georgians afford their utility bills? And how would you ensure these programs are effective and accessible? And this contributor wants specific ideas. Ms. Waits?
Yes, I love the idea of a cost benefit agreement. And what that means, if you come into the community and you build a data center or a nuclear power plant or whatever you build, that there is a direct benefit to the community. What's an example of that? Putting solar panels on a hospital, putting solar panels on a library, putting solar panels on a hospital. Right now, data centers, which we are all aware of, consume a large amount of water as well as power. We can recycle that wastewater. So there are a number of things that we can do. When you look at Germany as well as Finland, their parking lots are used to use for solar power. So that's one example that I think that there could be a benefit there. Lastly, Georgia has incentivized data centers at the tune of $296 million. Remember, we picked up that tab in the state of Georgia. So, cost benefit agreement, I think, will be extremely important. And then the last piece is this: make sure that we do an environmental assessment the same way at the local and county level, that we don't put a liquor store or these types of facilities in front of schools, and we don't put individuals who are may not necessarily have our best interests of our children. We do that same work as it relates to where we place data centers, where we place nuclear plants, to ensure that communities, generally black and brown, are not underserved, such as the wealth of landfills and those types of places and facilities that have been placed in our communities. And so an environmental impact study, I think, would be very, very critically important as it relates to how we interact with brown and black communities that have traditionally been overlooked and underserved for many years.
Okay, I'm going to go back to that question because I didn't hear specific programs that you would support to help low income Georgians afford their utility bills. And how would you ensure that these programs are effective and accessible?
Currently, we have in place a energy assistance program that's right now being wiped out at the federal level because we have someone in the White House who does not support those plans. So while we're incentivizing those same $296 million, I would be looking for those same utility companies to foot the bill in terms of some of those record profits, which should be capped at 11.9%, to put those profits back into the hands of families that have health related challenges, families that have low income funding, as well as senior citizens who have felt the brunt of these utility bills. So I would do that through a tiered rate system in terms of payments.
Okay. And I understand that currently Georgia Power offers the seniors, what is it, $30 discount on their bill every month? Okay. We'd like to see that increase for sure. Mr. Hubbard, same question. What specific programs would you support to help low-income Georgians afford their utility bills? And how would you ensure these programs are effective and accessible? And the contributor wants specifics.
This is a wonderful question because everyone is angry at their bills having increased as much as, by my calculation, $60 per month for the average user. It's much more than they advertise, $43 for the average user. That's one of the ways that Georgia Power sort of manipulates things to be not as bad as they seem. What I would do is we've just been talking about that. It's been mentioned that 11.9% return on equity. That's how much they earn, whatever they build. That's far higher than the market, which is around 9.7%. If we pushed back on that rate of return that the company earns, that would immediately lower power bills by 20%. That's the kind of extraction of wealth that is occurring right now. So that's an immediate way to provide that relief, is by pushing back on that rate of return and lowering that and providing that relief directly to folks. There are also other things, the LIHEAP, Low Income Heat and Assistance Program, and Energy and Assistance Program. That's what Ms. Waits was talking about, that's being gutted at the federal level. We will have to find dollars to replace that. It will come from that return on equity I just mentioned. And then there are also many different tariffs, and that word is confusing, but it's the amount that you pay, the plan that you're on, your electricity plan. And for low-income and moderate customers of Georgia Power Company, especially folks who are Black and brown, often the real challenge there is no matter how much they try and economize, they do their level best to save energy, that fixed portion keeps rising. And so we could put a cap on that and re-incentivize energy efficiency. There's many different things, but I want to really emphasize the profits, that 2.5 billion that Georgia Power Company earned last year. That's how we lower bills, is by pushing back on that excess profit.
And I understand the CEO made $4 million last year.
I think that's an underestimate. It's quite a
That's
bit.
what's published, was 4 million. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Thank you. All righty. What is your position, Ms. Waits, on the current rate structure for Georgia Power? And would you support or oppose future rate increases? In other words, Do you believe the current rate freeze, as agreed upon by Georgia Power and the Commission staff, is adequate to address rising energy costs, or should further measures be taken?
Well, I think it's important to talk about how rates are set, and that's through the rate case process, where the Georgia Power would submit a financial plan. They would talk about what their investments are, what their expected profits are, and then we would pretty much go back and forth and determine if that particular request is reasonable. Do I support the process? I think it's important that we have a reliable grid. And what do I mean by that? When you look at places like Puerto Rico and other areas where the infrastructure is problematic, we know we need to also invest in the grid. We do that through putting power lines under the ground and so forth. What I support is making sure that consumer needs and business needs are balanced. I think to say that we would never support a rate hike or an increase would be silly and immature. However, what we're talking about right now today is, for the last 2 decades in Georgia, there has been an abuse as it relates to consumer needs. And so we want to balance those needs. And so I'm very excited to see the rate freeze that's going to be in place through 2028. I think that families will benefit from that. But I also believe that we can do further work through these cost benefit agreements, such as weatherization, helping seniors to weatherize their homes so that they're not losing energy and through terrible cold storms and so forth. So there are a number of things that we can do to provide those resources to families, but many don't know about those. And a little bit later, I'd love to talk about solar and wind potential to save and to bring these bills down.
Okay. Thank you very much. Same question, Mr. Hubbard. What is your position on the current rate structure for Georgia Power, and would you support or oppose future rate increases? In other words, do you believe the current rate freeze, as agreed upon by Georgia Power and the Commission staff, is adequate to address rising energy costs, or should further measures be taken?
Yes. So I want to start by just saying I'm glad that Puerto Rico was mentioned as part of my expertise in 2017 after Hurricane Maria blew through. While I was working at Siemens Energy Business Advisory, I put together the power plan for how Puerto Rico would recover after that hurricane blew through. So I'm deeply involved in power systems planning, and I understand reliability very well. But to your question about the rate freeze, no, I do not agree with it. It's a Trojan horse. I was involved as an expert in the last integrated resource plan just last year when the company promised a decrease of $2.89 on everyone's bill. Where did that go? It just disappeared. And now we're talking about how great a rate freeze is after we've had 6 big rate increases. Again, that's $60 per month. So I do not think it is in the best interest. And the reason why is because we're only using half of our grid right now. There is plenty of juice we can squeeze out of the assets we have right now. We can welcome new economic growth without putting that burden on the existing customers who are not causing, they're not the data centers who are causing our power prices to increase. So, I mean, that's really where it falls, and I'll leave it there, but happy to answer more.
Okay, and just for clarity on that, is it true, and both of you can chime in on this one, is it true that you say, Mr. Hubbard, it is a Trojan horse, that the I'm going to say street committee, is that they're going to get around that by increasing the other fees, not the rate, but the other fees? Is that something that you guys are concerned about, or that you can address?
Yes. So they're locking in the base rates. That's 60% of your bill, but the other 40%, like the $50 you pay every month for the fuel, that can double. And fuel prices frequently do double. Natural gas is very volatile. And after Ukraine, Russia got into a war, they went up 4 or 5 times what they were. And we saw a huge increase on our bills as a result of that. We're still paying for. They also locked in fact, they set the floor on their return on equity 1 full percentage point above the actual floor. There's 4 or 5 different things in there where they can sneak in bill increases. Hurricane Helene has not yet been accounted for, and that's nearly $865 million that we'll see on our bills. So there's a lot of things that they're going to be, we're not going to see our bills be locked in. They're going to keep increasing.
Ms. Waits?
So, again, and Peter has already talked about the fuel, but the fees, the riders, those things certainly can go up. It kind of reminds me of purchasing an airline ticket, and then you find out you've got to pay for your cocktails, you've got to pay for your water, you've got to pay for your baggage. So, clear about that. Once again, the Public Service Commission has oversight, and we're able to work with the General Assembly to restructure some of those things. So I support the idea of restructuring the complete process so that we're not able to stick those fees in there. And I think one way we can tackle that is by digging into that 11.9% cap. If in fact you feel the need to raise fees, then we also want to make sure that Georgia Power feels the brunt of that through their record profits, which we've already heard, which it was in the billions, the 2.5 billion range. And so there is a way to balance that. I do believe when you look at the rate freeze, those conversations did not come about until we started this campaign process. And so we are driving a lot of the activity that you see happening at the PSC level. We simply need to be seated and work with the District 2 member out of Savannah, as well as members of the General Assembly, so that we can change the rules as it relates to ethics, taking funds from the individuals that we regulate, and we can change it back to being a consumer-driven organization, which was the original intent.
Okay. Moving along. Some candidates have argued that Georgia Power's allowed rate of return is extremely too high. How would you approach this issue, and what specific steps would you consider to balance the financial return for Georgia Power? Mr. Hubbard?
Right. So right now, if you are an electric utility and you don't have 5 commissioners that rubber stamp every power plan put in front of them, then you should be earning around 9.5% a rate of return, which is already pretty impressive compared to other investments, particularly U.S. Treasuries and bonds and things of that nature. Right now, Georgia Power Company earns 11.9%, but that's another Trojan horse because they can go over that and then they get to keep 40% of any overages. So they have gotten up over 13% before. These are big numbers, but it is important for a company to remain viable and to earn a profit, but it is in excess of what the market will support. And that's where we can push back, and we can still have all the nice things that we would like. We can still have reliable power, but we can make it cleaner, and we can drive down the cost of it by embracing these lower cost solutions that are being ignored right now. And so that's one of the very first things that I can do is shine that light on that disparity and put the pressure on my other colleagues, the commissioners there at the Public Service, to really bring that excessive return on equity or rate of return down to closer to the market level so that the company continues to prosper, and then Georgians also can have clean, reliable, and low-cost energy.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Waits, same question.
And Ms. Taylor, can you repeat it one more time?
Sure. Some candidates have argued that Georgia Power's allowed rate of income is too high. How would you approach this issue, and what specific steps would you consider to balance the financial return for Georgia Power?
So we talked a lot already about the 11.9 cap as it relates to profits. And my colleague has already told you that the national average is somewhere around 9. I'm not anti-data, I'm not anti-tech, and I don't have a problem with Georgia Power making profits. The issue that we're having is that there has not been any balance as it relates to that. Those 6 rate increases have been passed on to you and I. So again, I support a performance-based process. If Georgia Power is performing in a way that drives down costs, that meets our daily needs in terms of the reliability of our grid, then I believe they should make a profit. The issue is that we have a company that is making record billion-dollar profits off the backs of you and I, in addition to the fact that we are passing those costs on to senior citizens as well as working families and individuals who are hurting. So what I'd like to see is a performance-based process. Lastly, Georgia Power, which we know is a monopoly, deregulation did not serve the consumer here in Georgia. So I also support the idea of competition. When you look at other states, they don't have the same issues that we have in the state of Georgia because it's a competitive process. And I also want to mention that basically everyone in Georgia does not use Georgia Power. We have EMCs throughout the state of Georgia that I think will also be important. But for the most part, Georgia Power, I believe, has not been consumer friendly as it relates to the PSC and everyday consumers.
Okay, stop. How would the surge of public ser wait a minute, I'm reading too fast here. How will the surge of data centers impact Georgia's energy needs, and what steps should the Public Service Commission take to address this issue? Mr. Hubbard, and we know I did a town hall on the data centers just last week, and it was startling that Georgia has now become the hub and that they're flocking in here. And so how will that surge impact Georgia's energy needs? And what steps should the Public Service Commission take to address the issue?
Absolutely. I will address that. I just want to clarify something, though, that in Georgia, we have a heavily regulated electricity sector. That is the definition of what the regulators at the Public Service Commission do. Now, the natural gas market, you can choose from among 13 different providers, so that's deregulated, but we are highly regulated in terms of electricity in Georgia. Now, with respect to data centers, you're absolutely right, Representative Taylor. Atlanta is the fastest growing sector for data centers. And if we look at what happened in Northern Virginia, where there already are a huge amount of data centers, 25% of everyone's electricity bill can be directly attributed to those data centers. That is the future in Georgia if we don't have regulators who do something about that. We're staring down the barrel of that kind of future where a quarter to more of our power bills are directly attributable to data centers. Now, they can have some benefit as long as the economic development commissions and the governor don't abate the taxes. They can increase the sales and use tax and the property tax in a community, but they need to pay their fair share. And the commissioners have talked about this rule that they passed in January that says data centers will now pay their fair share. First of all, that implies that they weren't before, and they weren't. Also, when you read that rule, it still gives full authority and discretion to Georgia Power Company to decide what's in the interest of Georgians. And I know from 6 years of observing them that they do not. They always put corporate shareholders before Georgians. So we need a commissioner who understands the pressure that data centers bring, as well as the benefits, and can balance that. Right now, they're heavily balanced in favor of the data centers, who pay 5 times less than residential customers of Georgia Power Company pay. Again, we pay 5 times more than data centers for the same electrons. That's out of balance, and I'll fix that.
Okay, Ms. Waits, how
Well,
will the surge of data centers impact Georgia's energy needs, and what steps should the Public Service Commission take to address this issue?
thank you. So, for some context, a data center uses the same equivalent of a small town as it relates to water as well as power. So, there will be a need to provide the infrastructure necessary to power these particular facilities. Again, not anti-data center, but they bring very, very, very limited numbers of jobs. They use huge tracts of land, which we could be using for affordable housing, as well as addressing the housing crisis that many of us are experiencing around the state of Georgia. I think it's more important, though, Representative. It's easy to show up and offer these great, wonderful ideas in terms of what I think I would do. But the question is what have we already done? And the reality is we have to work with members of the General Assembly to regulate data centers. And Senate Bill 34, I believe, was on the right track to make that happen. Unfortunately, we made a decision in the state of Georgia, some of us, to go in a different direction. So I think we start with Senate Bill 34, which regulates that. And then, to my colleague's point, is that they have to pay their fair share. Data centers pay 40% below the national average, which again is why they're flocking here. So if we ask them and make them and mandate them to pay their fair share, I believe we can take some of the burden off the backs of seniors and working families who are struggling. To answer your point, is how do we help low income families of folks that are struggling? We get them out of the pockets of the commissioners. We already know this, and we've talked about this. The average commissioner has been given to the tune of $500,000 in campaign donations. So we have to put ethics policies in place where they're not allowed to take any funding from the very entities that they regulate.
And reset. Most voters do not even know what PSC does or how the decisions the commission makes affect them. And we have another PSC election in 2026 for District 5 and in 2028 for Districts 1 and 4. What will you do to educate the voters that will be most impacted by these Public Service Commission's decisions and elections? Mr. Hubbard?
I also very much enjoy this question because I've gotten to meet a lot of great people. And you're right, Representative Taylor, most people don't know there's an election going on. They don't know what the Public Service Commission is or does. And so it's sort of my mission to get out there and bring that information to folks. Energy is fundamental to an economy. If you don't have low cost and reliable and I would argue clean energy, then you're not going to grow. All of these new businesses that we're talking about coming to Georgia are coming here because the power prices that they pay are quite low. But they also, I think, are looking for clean energy, and that's what we need to bring more of that business to Georgia. And so there's really a whole host of things that we can be doing. And so I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought, Representative Taylor. If you don't mind just repeating the question so I can
Absolutely.
answer it.
How will you inform the voters or educate the voters on the decisions that the commission makes and how those decisions affect them?
And the
I think that,
2026 race. Yes, and I'm sorry, I've got it now in my head. I think it's incredibly important to continue to let people know that this is an opening that we have in this state of Georgia to change the Public Service Commission for the better. And that good can spread to Mississippi Power Company, Alabama Power Company, to other areas from Georgia. But of course, we're focused on Georgia here, and getting that information out will be my mission to let people know how vital this election is and to pave the way for success in November of 2026 so that we can have 3 commissioners. We can put our senator back in the US Senate, and we can have that change on the commission that we so desperately need to see. So it is vital that we have someone who is electable and that can get the job done in this November and then hit the ground running so that we make the case for getting that 3rd seat on the commission next November as well.
And I want to backtrack just for a second because I know Ms. Waits strongly supports SB 2, is it 238? I don't remember.
34, Senate Bill 34.
34. I got a bunch of them in my head. How do you feel about Senate Bill 34, Mr. Hubbard? Because it did put guardrails in place, established a oversight commission. So where do you stand with that? We really want to know.
Yeah, that was Senator Chuck Hufstetler's bill, SB 34, and I very much supported that, along with the other Senate bill that would have renamed the Public Service Commission to be a Public Utility Commission, so that the public would know what it is that they do. They're certainly not serving the public right now, but they are fundamental to your utility bill. So both of those I'd love to see, and there's a lot more legislation we should be pushing as well.
Okay, thank you for letting me backtrack a little bit. Ms. Waits, most voters do not know what the PSC Commission does or how the decisions the commission makes that affects them. And we will have another PSC election in 2026 attendees for District 5 and in 2028 for Districts 1 and 4. And before I move on, even though we're voting this year for Districts 2 and 3, all Georgia citizens will be voting again next year for District 5. And in 2028, you'll be voting again. We will be voting again for Districts 1 and 4. So everybody votes, even if it's not your district. Ms. Waits, what will you do to educate the voters that will be most impacted by the PSC's decisions?
Thank you for the question. And I'd like to use the last 30 seconds to talk about the statement made about electability. It's my understanding, and I'm pretty clear that I'm the only one in this particular race, any candidate in this race that's ever been elected for 3 terms in the Georgia House, as well as on the Atlanta City Council. I am the only candidate that has actually done that. So when we talked about electability, I want to make sure that we give correct and factual information. So I've traveled throughout the state, just like all of my colleagues in this race, where we have raised awareness. And that's been the biggest challenge, that most people had no idea the organization even exists, which is a supposedly consumer-friendly organization. So we do that through town halls. If you go to my social media as well as my website, I have put public service announcements out there. I've talked about what the benefits and the non-benefits of the rate freeze. I've talked about how we determine and set rates. I've talked about why non-Georgia Power customers should care about this election. And we do that through PSAs, through robocalls, through text messages. We raise awareness to consumers who simply don't know why this particular election matters. And that was by design. design. They didn't want you to know it even exists. And we've seen that type of dynamic because historically in brown and black communities, we've lacked representation. The fact that this election has been canceled a number of times is not by accident. In fact, there are conversations swirling to cancel it again because we finally have individuals who are sincere about putting the consumer first. So we do that through these types of conversations. I think there are 107 people online tonight, and they will force multiply that information and help people to understand. And then lastly, we return it to its original intent. As Mr. Hubbard has already indicated, we are supposed to be a consumer friendly agency that supports consumers. And right now, for the last 2 decades, it has supported utility companies and agencies that have benefited off the backs of taxpayers and ratepayers.
Okay. My final question, and we'll go to the Q&A. Oh, we got 43 questions over there. What time is it? Okay. What is your vision for the role of renewable energy sources? And Mr. Hubbard, you just alluded to clean energy sources. And what we're referring to is like solar and wind in Georgia's energy mix. And how would you support their development and integration?
Sure. So this is the perfect question for me because I live, eat, and breathe energy and how we're going to answer that question of transitioning off of the dirty fossil gas and coal and towards the cleaner and cheaper and more reliable resources like solar, battery storage, distributed energy resources, but we have to be careful about them. It was mentioned that we could put solar on parking lots. The reason you don't see that is because it's 3 times as expensive as other forms of solar. So we have to be very careful about what we're building so that we're not driving up prices. But absolutely, I have published a plan that is comparable to what Georgia Power Company has issued in terms of what we build and what we retire with respect to those clean energy resources. So I've detailed every single year and what that will look like. It's a pathway that maintains reliability and drives down prices. It's a very specific plan. I published it at my website. It's the nonprofit that I've run for the last 6 years, the Georgia Center for Energy Solutions. That is a specific plan on how we achieve that clean energy future that we so need in Georgia.
Okay, Ms. Waits, the same question. Let me reset. What is your vision for the role of renewable energy sources like solar and wind in Georgia's energy mix, and how would you support their development and integration?
Great question. So, renewable energy, such as solar and wind, it brings clean, it's abundant, and it's increasingly affordable, meaning you always are going to have sunshine and you're always going to have wind. So, that reduces pollution, it combats climate change, as well as creates jobs, green jobs. Also, support expanding energy interdependence. So, right now, most people don't know that Georgia Power actually has a solar plan. However, they don't promote it because they can't make money off of it. So the goal is to make solar more affordable and attainable for working families. And I think we do that by starting with libraries, schools, those types of entities. And we do that through these cost benefit agreements so that we can start to drive down the cost of rates that we're experiencing right now and take the demand off the grid. So as these data centers come online in Georgia, as well as these other entities come online, we have already started to move and shift towards solar and wind, which we will need to do in the next decade and in our lifetime.
Okay. Question from the audience. The first one is, if you buy your power, and this is a great one, I meant to include it, but if you buy your power from an EMC and not Georgia Power, what is your motivation to participate in this election? And before you answer, Mr. Hubbard, graciously explain the difference so that those who don't know.
Yes, I'd be happy to. So Georgia Power Company services around half of the state, and then there are 41 electric membership corporations. They service roughly half, but there's also the Municipal Energy Authority of Georgia. There's the Oglethorpe Power, Dalton Utilities. There's a few one-offs as well, but largely most people are either under the monopoly Georgia Power Company or the Electric Membership Corporation. There's a pretty big difference between those two. If you're in the lowest cost EMC, Cobb EMC, your average bill's around $100. If you're Georgia Power Company, it's around $200. So a lot of people who pay that Georgia Power Company bill are motivated to come out and see a change in the Public Service Commission. But even if you're an EMC customer, you live in Georgia, you breathe the air that these dirty fossil plants are polluting, And the EMCs do often buy a significant amount of power wholesale from Georgia Power Company, and many of them did participate in the Vogtle power plant and all of its cost overruns. So you have an incentive if you're an EMC customer to see a change at the Public Service Commission, which will cascade down across Georgia Power Company and the 41 EMCs, as well as those others I mentioned.
Okay. Ms. Waits,
Yes.
say, let me reset. You want me to repeat the question?
Sure.
If you buy your power from an EMC and not Georgia Power, what is your motivation to participate in this election?
Thank you for the question. So the PSC sets statewide energy and utility policy. Even if you're not a Georgia Power customer, you may be affected by those decisions as it relates to gas, broadband access, and the Energy's Grid Alliance. Also, public money and environmental impacts don't stop at utility borders. The direction that Georgia takes impacts the economic development, it impacts air quality as well as climate. We all remember what happened as it relates to Rockdale County and the fuel fire that happened at Biolab. We all remember that. Well, guess what? It wasn't just DeKalb and Rockdale that were impacted. All of us were impacted in terms of clean air and breathing relatability. Lastly, Vine City right now, community in the city of Atlanta, is fighting against a substation in a community that would not benefit from that particular substation, which will benefit another community that's adjacent. These are the types of examples where Georgia Power has not been a good neighbor. Again, I actually made public comment at that meeting on June 23rd, which I don't know why I did not see my colleague, but nonetheless, everybody is impacted as it relates to the decisions that Georgia Power makes.
And just to extend from that, EMCs are nonprofit and Georgia Power is for profit. I have an EMC and I love them. I really do. And you didn't name ours. Neither one of you named ours, but Snapping Shows is above. Okay. Let me stop that. Reset. The next question is what type of experience does Miss Waits have in energy? Miss Waits,
I'm happy to answer that question.
I mean, that was our first question.
Okay.
Yeah, that was our first question.
May I answer the question?
Yeah, if you want to.
Absolutely.
Reiterate.
Thank you so much. Yes. During my tenure in the General Assembly, I served on the Public Safety, Transportation, Juvenile Justice Committee. But as you know, Representative Taylor, we vote on all issues as it relates to the state of Georgia, which includes energy costs and things of that nature. During my tenure on the Atlanta City Council, we voted regarding public utilities, which I attended those meetings as well. So I have taken thousands of votes, Mr. Hubbard, as it relates to energy policy and how it affects consumers. As it relates to oversight, this is an administrative role. So I don't need to be an energy expert to understand how to advocate for working families and seniors because that's something that I have been doing for the last 2 decades. And so I will continue in that role, standing up to bullies and giants, because that's something that I have been doing on the Atlanta City Council and as a member of the Georgia General Assembly. Thank you.
And do we have any coal mines, Mr. Hubbard, in Georgia?
No, you'd have to go over out to Alabama to find that. That's a very good point that every year we send more than $1 billion in fuel costs to Wyoming and other states when we could be keeping those dollars here. That's one of hundreds of things that we could do to lower power bills. So no, we don't have coal and there's no such thing as clean coal.
Okay. Now, and Ms. Waits, I'm going to start with you and I'm going to rephrase this a little bit so it comes out more of a question. If we elect you and you do not hold to what your promises, the promises that you've made, how should we hold you accountable?
Well, the beauty of having been elected, I believe 4 separate times, is that the voters speak loudly. And the voters will make those decisions. I have always given out my cell phone number, which I will do again at 404-538-3479. I've always taken a great deal of pride in terms of being accessible, which is why you see my cell phone number and my email address on the website. How do you hold me accountable? Well, part of this job also means showing up. And I mentioned the Monday, June 23rd when we went over to advocate and talk about the fact that they're trying to put another substation in the community of Vine City, which will get no direct benefit. You hold me accountable. One, if I don't do the things that I say I'm going to do, you should not return me to office and fire me. So that's the first thing. And I'm very proud of the fact that I was elected multiple times in the Georgia House of Representatives. I'm very proud of the legislation that I've offered. I'm proud of the fact that I, including my colleagues, have made the decision to not take a dime from utility companies. And so you hold us accountable and we remain transparent.
Okay, Mr. Hubbard, same question. If we elect you and you deviate, how do we hold you accountable?
Accountability has to be at the forefront because we have not had that. We haven't even had the chance to hold our current commissioners accountable because elections have been canceled for years now. And so I think elections are one way to hold your officials accountable and to hold me accountable. And you will know because I have to immediately start running. Should I be the nominee and win in November, I will have to immediately start to run again because it's only a 1-year term when it should be a 6-year term. So I have to hit the ground running and make the case that I deserve re-election. And I think that will be the true test is having another election 1 year after that. But again, the plan that I've already prepared and published, it is open kimono, if you will. Anyone can come in and examine it and say, you know, this assumption was good or bad, but it's open and transparent, and that is what we don't have. And so you can hold me accountable by reviewing what I've put out there and published, and it's very voluminous. There's a lot of information, but I'm always happy to take a call and explain anything to you. And that's how I intend to be transparent, is to be as open and transparent and forthright and explaining why I'm making a decision rather than just rubber stamping.
Okay. Wait a minute, they're popping, they're going too fast. I can't keep up with them. Here we go. Let me go back up. Wow. That's 52 questions now. Where is it? Where did I stop? Wait a minute, y'all, slow down now. Slow down. I can't find where we were. Let me go back up this way. Okay. Describe your advocacy work beyond or no, particularly with and in front of the PSC. And I'm going to say beyond the PSC. Ms. Waits, go ahead.
Well, I want to go back to the Vine City piece because I think that's important because these are the types of things that I have seen in the last 2 decades. I remember we were fighting the landfill closure over here in South Fulton when it was on fire for several months, and then recently, the fire that happened out in Rockdale County. I was happy to partner with my colleagues, Senator Tanya Anderson, Senator Representative Doreen Carter, as it relates to how we move forward. In fact, when I spoke with you at our last forum, I was proud of the fact that we were talking about closure, and you reminded me that there were 2 other locations in these communities. So I am not a Johnny come lately to this conversation. Uh, it's interesting. My colleague has talked a lot about attending public meetings, but prior to April 2025, I can't find any of record of him attending any of these public service meetings. When you go back to 2012, when I was elected, when we were fighting guns everywhere in the state of Georgia, these are conversations where I led the fight as a member of the Public Service Commission. When we had a young lady who was brutally assaulted and murdered in the city of Atlanta, I put forth Miriam's Law, which we passed it on the Atlanta City Council, went over and advocated at Fulton County, and then went back to the General Assembly and passed it with a Republican senator as well as a Republican representative. So I have relationships working across the aisle. I have relationships fighting for Georgia families and consumers, and I think that that is a critical necessity as it relates to this particular role in terms of being a member of the Public Service Commission.
Okay, Mr. Hubbard, same question. Describe your advocacy work, particularly with and in front of the PSC. And then my little add-on is and beyond, speaking in reference to the community and social services.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I want to make clear again that 6 years ago in 2019, I formed a nonprofit called the Georgia Center for Energy Solutions so that I could do this advocacy work and steer us down the path that we should have been on many, many years ago. And so It would be very clear if Ms. Waits has visited my website, and I know she has because she's pulled down my analysis and put it forward as her own on her own website. That if she had visited that website, she would see that I've been in front of the Public Service Commission now since 2019, participating as an expert witness, an intervener in 4 integrated resource plans, arguing for this. So my nonprofit advocacy work for 6 years in front of the Public Service Commission is first and foremost for this job. But I also have been a public servant in other ways. I was a Peace Corps volunteer overseas for 2 years representing the United States. I've been a volunteer for the remote area medical clinic. And this is veering off of the energy topic, but public service is very important. I've also been participated in 5 different vaccine clinical trials because public health is very important to me, and public health is intimately related to some of these fossil gas and coal plant emissions that we're talking about and the effects there. So public service can't just be focused on one thing. It has to be broad. It has to be something you live, eat, and breathe. And I feel that I represent that through the 6 years of service that I've given to try and make Georgia a better place in terms of energy.
Okay. My
Ms.
clock got
Taylor,
away from me.
the statement was made that I went to his website and borrowed his analysis. What I did is I gave my own take on the questions in terms of what a rate freeze means and how it impacts us, as well as how we set rates. He has repeatedly, Mr. Hubbard, talked about the Georgia Center for Solutions. And my team and I have went to the Secretary of State, which you know, Representative Taylor, you have to register nonprofits, and there is no nonprofit called the Georgia Center for Solutions, Mr. Hubbard. There is no 990 return as it relates to nonprofits because you have
The
to
Georgia
file the. Let
Center
me
for
just get it out.
Energy
Let me just get it out,
Solutions.
sir. Respectfully.
I'll be happy to file.
No, I'm not pushing back. Let me just finish because you said that you said this,
do simple research,
Mr. Hubbard. You have
know that
said
you're
this
going to be
multiple
able to do
times
service.
that you
Mr. Hubbard, let her finish, and we'll let you rebut.
Mr. Hubbard has said multiple times all over the state of Georgia that he offers 15 years of energy policy. When you go to the Georgia Secretary of State's website where all nonprofits are registered, there is no nonprofit called the Georgia Center for Solutions. And I'm troubled by that. You also have never filed a 990 return as it relates to this nonprofit. So I challenge your record as it relates to energy policy because I don't believe you have any. The same way you made the statement that you have been testifying for the last 6 years as it relates to the PSC Commission, we have went back and examined all of those public hearings, and the only one I can find is when you made a decision to qualify in April of 2025 to run for office. I can tell you that I have thousands of public hearings as it relates to interviews, as it relates to policy, when you look at my role in totality. You also said to me tonight that you were in Puerto Rico. So I was in Puerto Rico on the ground for those 2 years. So what company or contractor did you come there with? Because these are situations where I made the decision and led these particular fights as it related to restabilizing the grid. And I did not see you in Puerto Rico. I have not seen you in Georgia prior to April of 2025.
Mr. Hubbard, quickly, please.
Yeah, I think it's a basic core competency that you should be able to Google something by the correct name, the Georgia Center for Energy Solutions. It's very much registered. It's very much active. All you have to do is, I don't think she's ever been to the Public Service Commission website and looked up the dockets. It's all in the public record. If she's failing to do the basic research, I just don't understand how she could be a public service commissioner. This is basic stuff.
Okay, we're going to move on. It says, Mr. Hubbard, can you please explain your plan to reduce power bills a little bit more? And additionally, can both candidates address their strategy to fight against increases in coal power and natural gas in the 2025 IRP? And I just found that, so that's a good question. Mr. Hubbard?
So go to the Georgia Center for Energy Solutions. It's georgia-ces.org. That is where you will see my plan for the 2025 Integrated Resource Plan on how we avoid building the fossil gas plants that are secretly being built right now and pushed forward. I have a plan for how we're going to retire the coal on time in 2032 and replace it with those clean energy resources. It's very detailed, and I've got that laid out in some detail on that website. So I would very much encourage you to go there. And when we start to embrace the cleaner resources, the lower cost resources, that will bring down our power bills, as well as clawing back some of the excess profits that we've talked about here tonight. So there's very tangible ways that we can provide rate relief right from the start. We'll have to convince a majority of the commissioners. That's why we need to have folks who are invested and know what they're doing. But there are definitely ways to reduce the power bills that we're seeing.
Okay. Ms. Wade, same question. Can
Well,
you address your strategy to fight against increases in coal power and natural gas in the 2025 IRP?
thank you so much. I want to talk about how I will protect low income families as well as individuals who may be having health related issues and have to have access to power constantly. We do this through bill assistance program expansion. And we do this because, as we know, at the federal level, they're already eradicating these programs. And so I would require these same companies who have benefited through these incentives to pick up that tab. Lastly, I think it's important that we fund energy efficient upgrades to low income homes, which will reduce long term bill usage in terms of high rates. And then lastly, I've talked a lot tonight about a tiered rate structure where the first block of energy use is cheaper to families who are on fixed incomes, who are senior citizens, or who are having challenges. I would oppose any unfair fixes that penalize people who utilize less power, in addition to ensuring utilities that they can't pass risk assessments and unnecessary costs onto these vulnerable communities. As it relates to natural gas, we all know that in the state of Georgia, deregulation did not serve the everyday average consumer. And I think we do that by looking at how these additional fees and assessments are passed on. I'm getting phone calls from consumers who may tell me that their bill may only be $30, $40, but the fees, the riders, and all of these other fees are what's killing them every single day. And I think we do that by audit. I think we do that by decreasing the cap on Georgia Power profits. And then lastly, we require a performance-based system as it relates to how companies and businesses profit in the state of Georgia.
Okay, this is a question that I think is timely. For this election, we all know that voter turnout and for what are we in? I can't even think. I've been talking so much tonight. For a runoff, the turnout is significantly low. So, what are you two doing to mobilize voters back to the poll on July 15th, Mr. Hubbard?
Education and information is truly what's needed here. There's 8.4 million registered voters, and less than 3% came out, around 140,000. Now, we know that the people that are feeling the most pain, those are the Georgia Power Company customers under the monopoly utility rather than the membership-owned DMCs. So they're feeling the pain. That's why you saw a lot more Democrats come out than Republicans, and because there hasn't been a choice on that Republican side. So really what I'm doing is participating in fora like this. This is incredibly important to get the information out, but also trying to touch base with every single person that is going to be motivated to come out, that has expressed an interest in energy. And so in meeting with folks, I've built up that Rolodex, if you will, of people that I can reach out to and encourage them to vote. And so directly targeting motivated people is what I'm trying to do to encourage them. And if I'm lucky enough to be the nominee, I'll use the next 5 months to travel as much as I can and get that information out so that we have the turnout we need in November.
Ms. Wade, same question.
I think that when you look at the performance statewide, I think it speaks to the fact that I'm probably one of the very few candidates in this race that's actually traveled statewide in Georgia. Running statewide logistically is financially burdening as well as a logistical nightmare. But rural Georgia has very, very unique needs that are very, very different from metropolitan Atlanta. One of the reasons that I think you saw the turnout that you saw is because the voters have simply checked out. I think they're disgusted with what you see at the federal level. And frankly, they don't believe us. They don't understand how there is a correlation between the PSC and what the role that they serve in terms of how we can advocate and change the dynamic. And you asked the question, Representative, that I thought was pretty poignant, and that is, how will you hold us accountable? What will we do different? How can you ensure that once we join the PSC that we won't rubber stamp and that we won't make excuses? You look at what we have already done. I stood up as it related to the public safety training facility when there was a 30, 60, $90 million cost overrun. I've already done that. And that's something that I'm extremely proud of. When we were having conversations as it related to building the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, 200 million was passed on to the taxpayers. I asked the question because I was actually present and in the room making those decisions. And so at the end of the day, we were all able to reap the benefit through a cost benefit agreement, as I've so talked about earlier tonight. So I'm excited about that. And I think it's important that we have individuals who not only are electable, but individuals that we can trust and that have already done this work, and that they're not Johnny come latelys as it relates to showing up in April 2025 to have these meaningful conversations.
So the apathy, I'm going to push back on that one for both of you. The apathy that exists in the voters currently, do you have a thought or a solution, a mechanism as to what you're going to do directly to get them back to the polls on or before July the 15th? Because that's critical. Only one of you can win. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I think that these conversations, start the process, and I think Mr. Hubbard can second it when I say to you that we've probably attended now. I think we're around 17 of these types of forums where we've gathered individuals in the room and we've talked about policy. I think that's important. I think you do that through town halls. When I was a member of the Atlanta City Council as well as a member of the Georgia General Assembly, I didn't stay in the chamber. I was always traveling throughout the state of Georgia when these types of issues came up. So you do that through town hall. You do that through social media. I have a PSA running statewide telling you why you should care about this race. That is extremely costly. And then, of course, robocalls. We all hate them. We hate robocalls. But how else can I call 380,000 people and wake them up and say, hey, we need you to show up? And here's the thing, and I gave this charge this past weekend at a forum. No matter who you support, show up in this election, because the reality is we are all impacted by the decisions. And I am again committing right here tonight that regardless of who the nominee is, I will be standing alongside that person. I'm hoping that it is me, to make sure that we elect the Democrat so that we can move us in the right direction. Us beating up on one another is not the answer. That's not something that I wanted to do. However, every time I pick up my phone or I get a text or an email, I am being bombarded with things that are just simply not true. And so we start this conversation by coming together in unity and making a pledge and a commitment that we're going to work together, that we're going to elect individuals who are like-minded and utilize common sense legislation to move Georgia forward and actually help families and not be distracted with the nuances that you've seen in the last 2 months.
And so, Mr. Hubbard, what's your GOTV plan between now and the 15th?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I know exactly who voted in this primary, and I'll be reaching out to all of those people again to make the case that I am the person who's going to hit the ground running and has the 6 years of experience directly before the commission, plus 15 years of energy experience. But I think it is important as well to just, since it's been mentioned a few times, I did not just show up in April of 2025. If you simply go to my campaign website, Peter Hubbard, FOR, Georgia, PSC.com, I know it's long, you'll see many videos of me in front of the Public Service Commission talking about these issues. So I've been there for 6 years. I would just encourage my Miss Waits to sharpen her pencil on the research a little bit.
Okay. Y'all, my clock just running. That was some good conversation. Okay. I think we've answered this one here, but I'm gonna go ahead and try to put it out there. How do you plan to make sure residential rates stay fair and reasonable when data centers seem to demand more electricity because of their growth? It appears as if residential customers are bearing the burden of costs that are not related to our personal use. I sure wish this attendee had been in our town hall last week, because um, the presenter gave some amazing information about how to ask for things from those data centers those builders that are coming in. If you need some money for a new school, make them invest in your community, because number one, they're not bringing jobs, and that's typically your economic development. That is typically what they do. They bring jobs. And since they're not, we have to coalesce with our board of commissioners and our city council members and demand some things for them taking up the land. You know, we can make them, I think one of the things that they were saying was redo the water from the rooftops or make them pay for their own water and electricity. So I can send that PowerPoint presentation out if anyone wants to just reach out to me. Um, the housing crisis is getting out of hand and electric bills are rising. What can we do to help keep voters in their homes? That's anyone, y'all, either one of you want to go ahead, Ms. Wade.
Absolutely. As a member of the city council, we were tackling that, and I'm extremely proud to have worked with our mayor and members of the council to put a legacy program in place for seniors and in legacy residents that have been in their home for a number of years to protect them. There is a fund that is actually in place. So if they're having trouble with paying their property taxes and so forth, there are resources available to them. Secondly, if you need homeowner repairs and you can demonstrate that you are of a fixed income, there are programs in place to support you as it relates to those areas. I am the only candidate in this race who's actually read and looked at a cost benefit agreement and signed off on it. I'm the only candidate in this race that has any legislative and policy experience as it relates to fighting for Georgia families. I'm the only candidate in this race that's been elected not one, but 4 separate times that has experience fighting and working for Georgia families in this race. And I will continue to do that work when I am a member of the Public Service Commission if the voters will bless me with that opportunity.
And Mr. Hubbard, I'm going to tack on this other question because we've got a lot of them to go. Why should the public trust you? So the first question was, how do you make the general public much more aware? Oh, that's what we did. The housing crisis is getting out of hand and the electric bills are rising. What can you do to keep voters in their homes? And then I'm combining that question with why should the public trust? I think that's the accountability piece, right? Would you all agree? Okay. Mr. Hubbard, you want to comment on the housing?
I would just reiterate that again, Georgia is one of the states that has the highest energy burden, and that particularly impacts folks that are low and moderate income. And so energy is fundamental to keeping people in their houses, and we have to pay attention to that. So again, there's many different ways that we can bring down those power bills for those most affected. We just need commissioners with conviction. We need to make sure that the benefits of these new customers that want to do business in Georgia, like the data centers, that they can come here, but that they pay their fair share. Again, we are paying 5 times as much for the same power as those data centers. So we have to, and I wholly support what you said, Representative Taylor, that we need to be asking for those benefits. It takes work, and I know we have to work with our commissioners, the economic development authorities. We can't have too many abated taxes, but those data centers can bring benefits. But we have to have commissioners that make sure that they are paying their fair share, that they don't cut and run before, if we build all this infrastructure and they don't stick around, who's left holding the bag? We are. And so that's how we keep housing affordable, is by keeping energy prices low in part. As far as the trust issue, again, I would just reiterate that I have been doing this work and publishing this data and being very open about the analysis and how we can transition to lower cost energy resources. And also, being very open about the funding. That was, in fact, a question that was asked of the commissioners: is where are you getting your funding from to do all this work? It is a labor of love. No one has given me any money to be able to do this analysis before the Public Service Commission. I'm harnessing my expertise to do what's right for Georgians, and that's why I'm in this Public Service Commission race.
Okay, Mr. Hubbard, your IRP testimony exposed flaws in Georgia Power's models, but PSC decisions are much more about political alliances as technical insight. How will you build coalitions within the commission to challenge Georgia Power's lobbying power? And then for both, well, go ahead and answer that one for me first, Mr. Hubbard. Let me get.
Yeah, so let's just go ahead and assume that that we won't have Fitz Johnson and Tim Echols, because we'll be successful in November and we'll have 2 Democrats on the Public Service Commission. And I hope that will be myself and Dr. Johnson. So that leaves the remaining 3 commissioners. Now, of those, Commissioner McDonald has been on the commission for a long time and actually was very convincible in 2013 to start building more utility scale solar. And so he's very amenable. I think he's someone that I can work with. I'm sure of it. I know he's got a lot of positions that I can work with. Also, the current chairman, Commissioner Shaw, he's the kind of gentleman that I think that I could get along with well and convince that there are better ways. Sometimes he follows, he tried to pass off tires as a renewable energy fuel. So sometimes they make pretty bad decisions, but I think I can work with them. Commissioner Pryden, I do not think can be worked with. I think she's full MAGA, and I don't think that there's any working with her. But we're going to get her out of the commission next year anyway. So there is diplomacy. That's ingrained in me. My wife is the daughter of 2 diplomats in the Foreign Service. I know that it requires working across lines, and that's incredibly important, especially when it comes to legislation in the Georgia legislature that will have to get passed to see some of the reforms that we'd like to see. So, there's everyone can be convinced. It doesn't matter how conservative you are. There are land rights issues, fiscal conservative things, and national security that resonate with Republicans as well as Democrats. And so meet voters where they are. That's how I'll work across lines.
Ms. Waits, the same attendee wants to know, you say that you can't promise rate increases, but how will you ensure protections for vulnerable consumers rather than utility profits?
Well, I've mentioned that a few times. I'd like to answer the question that as it relates to political relationships, but back to protecting consumers, I've already given multiple examples tonight of how we did that. And we did that through taking on giants and standing up for consumers. I've given you multiple examples of what I've already did as it relates to the public safety training facility in Atlanta. Wasn't opposed to it, but I was opposed to the fact that we passed on 30 million, then it went to 60 million, and then it went to 91 million onto taxpayers without any put from them whatsoever. And then we went into a community where those individuals had no vote and no say on the conversation. So I've stood up for those types of communities. When the city of South Fulton made the decision that they wanted to have the say and have their own fate, I was one of the number 2 signers on the legislation to create the city of South Fulton. And so those are the types of examples that I'm talking about. I quickly want to go back and pivot to political relationships. Commissioner Jason Shaw and I actually served during the time frame that I was on the PSC. So several of the pieces of legislation as it relates to public safety.
That you were on the PSC?
Jason Shaw, who is a commissioner on the PSC, and I served together in the Georgia General Assembly.
There you go. Okay.
Thank you so much. I apologize for that. And we took on tough issues on public safety as well as transportation committees. Bubba McDonough also, as my colleague indicated, served on the PSC. But these are not relationships that I have to form, Representative. These are relationships that I already have around the state of Georgia from working with them through building trust on tough issues when we took on guns everywhere in the state of Georgia, when we tackled immigration reform, as well as social reproductive justice. And so I am not a Johnny come lately to this conversation. I have these existing relationships. I've shown you that through my numbers as it relates to throughout the state of Georgia. And I can assure you, if I were giving public testimony for the last 6 years, then clearly there's a failure somewhere, because in the state of Georgia, we've had 6 increases. We're 8th in terms of high utility bills in Metro Atlanta and disconnection rate. So somebody has failed as it relates to making public comments before the PSC, as well as 15 years of energy policy. So I'm happy to redirect my focus and get down to work on these issues and tackle them. And I'm hoping that at some point we can all align and unite and partner together to help elect Dr. Alicia Johnson in Savannah, as well as our next Democrat out of the District 3 race, and get back to work for the consumer and not be distracted with things that really don't matter.
Okay, I am very concerned that when the PSC privatized the natural gas, consumers have been forced to pay a separate fee for gas lines that still belong to Atlanta Gas and Light. Further, customers are also forced to pay a customer service fee that ranges from $3.99 to as much as $9 a month and more. Customer service should be free. What do you plan to do about these extra costs to our natural gas bill? Mr. Hubbard?
Well, the issue with natural gas and it's truly fossil gas, is that it's a subscription model. So imagine with Netflix, you have to keep paying month after month, versus if you were to just buy the movie, then you can watch it anytime you want to. And that's the difference with natural gas right now, is we have to keep buying it over and over again, and it's a very costly resource over the long term, versus these lower cost resources like solar, that you build it and then the fuel just comes to you for free every day consistently. So there's many of these things that we can do there. And I'm sorry, just once again, just remind me of the question. I just want to make sure I focus right in on exactly what you asked,
Oh,
Representative Taylor.
wait, because I moved on trying to get us out of here in the next 5 or 6 minutes.
Sorry.
They're saying that what can you do
The
about
gap.
these extra costs of the natural gas bill?
I would just say, yeah, sorry. Thank you for refocusing me. I sometimes go a mile a minute. What we need to do is transition off the fossil gas to the lower cost electricity resources. That's how we can keep those bills low. Right now, what they do, this is a trick, and this is what you would know if you have been down in front of the commission. They try and put more of your bill in that fixed demand charge, that no matter how much you economize and how efficient you are, you still pay that. You could go on vacation for a month and come back to a bill that's $40. So we have to shift more of that onto, if you are energy efficient and consume less, then you don't pay as much. And so that's a clear model that we can be transitioning to. And again, they're trying to put more of the cost of your power bill on that section that does not change. And so we have to have people that are focused on that rate design and understand those are the mechanisms that we can pull, those levers we can pull to drive down power prices for consumers, particularly with respect to fossil gas. There we just transition off of it. That's how we pay less.
Ms. Waits?
Yes, thank you for the question. So I gave you the example of buying an airline ticket, and then once you get in your seat, you're having to pay to sit in the seat. You're having to pay for your beverage, or you're having to pay to use the restroom. And essentially, that's what's happening. But we also have to explain to individuals and educate them in terms of the process. The reality is that those lines have to be paid for. So how do we absorb those fees? Well, right now, consumers are paying fees, they're paying riders as well as cost adjustments. We, as the Public Service Commission, we have the power to weigh in on what those fees and rates are going to be. And we have to balance, again, those consumer needs versus those of business consumer needs. And given the record number of profits that you have seen in the state of Georgia, we have not done a good job of that. So we start one with an audit of what those fees are, what is actually being collected. And I support, again, I'm going to take you back to a tiered rate system. This is one for families who are seniors as well as low income families who may be burdened with these fees. Georgia Power, if you recall during COVID, removed the convenience fees from having to pay your bill. So these are some of the types of things we do. And we do those through these cost benefit agreements to consumers to make sure that we're not having those burdens on working families as well as seniors.
Okay. This is the last couple of questions. I'm trying to go through and see what's what. What are your, and this is very interesting to me as well. I'm interested to hear your responses. What are your thoughts, Ms. Waits, regarding the PSC district maps?
You're referring to the electoral process?
No, how they drew the PSC maps, the districts, how they're drawn.
Oh my. Well, Representative Taylor, for those of us who've actually been involved in the political process, I think for the last 2 decades, as I have, this is nothing new. I mean, we saw this every single year when we get ready to redraw maps in the state of Georgia, the gerrymandering. We saw this at the congressional level where there is the dilution of Black and brown voters. And then lastly, there is a desire to keep the PSC conservative so that they can continue to pass these costs on to us. I believe, and I will continue to advocate, just as these other organizations have done, that the Public Service Commission should be elected from the actual district where you represent, and only those members. District 3 encompasses DeKalb, Fulton, and Clayton counties. There is no reason why we should have an election statewide in this race. And the only reason why we are formatted in this way is to dilute voting power of the cities to ensure that we put forward someone that will continue to be a rubber stamp for rate hikes. So I believe that we need to change that process and go back to the drawing board to change that. I talked about that in an op-ed that the actual HSC published, where we talked about this gerrymandering process. And so it does not serve rural Georgia. It has not served metro Georgia. There is no reason why individuals in rural Georgia should not be able to hold their member accountable in those areas, and instead having to look to 5 members who may never set foot in those districts, in those communities. I'm sure the community that you represent, you have a unique understanding of the basic needs of that community. Someone that's living up in Blue Ridge and LJ are not going to understand the needs and issues that those communities face. And so, for that reason, I believe that they should be elected at the congressional level, which is what you see throughout the state of Georgia. But unfortunately, the PSC has been politicized as a football, and it's most unfortunate because it has harmed Georgia families.
Okay, you mean elected at the district level?
Elected the same way that we elect our congressional members, meaning they're not elected statewide. You come from a district. So, for example, here in Atlanta, we have District 5, which is Congresswoman Nakima Williams. We should be electing individuals only from, the vote should come only from the District 3 where these individuals live, so that we can truly hold those folks accountable versus electing those individuals statewide, where there is the idea of diluting voting strength and not being able to hold each individual accountable.
And okay, and I'm going to come to you because I want to hear what you have to say about that, Mr. Hubbard. But I'm thinking that because the District 3 is actually Metro Atlanta, Rockdale is included in that, not just Fulton, DeKalb, and Clayton. Clayton is next door to us, basically. So it's more than that. And my interpretation of this question would be how they have drawn the maps. For example, Savannah is District 2. It goes all the way up into Tifton and then come back across, and it's just a zigzag. And you touched on it by the gerrymandering, but I just wanted to clarify that I think that's my interpretation of the question. It's not so much what we know is gerrymandering, but not so much how you're elected. Of course, I will be very transparent. I was for district as well, but I think that was interpretation. Mr. Hubbard, what are your thoughts regarding the PSC district maps?
Great question, because it's the redrawing of those maps is the reason why we don't have a Democratic commissioner right now, because Patty Durand, who would have run for that seat, was drawn out of her district when Tricia Pridemore asked Tim Eccles where she lives, and then they drew her out of the district so that she would no longer be able to qualify based on residency. That happened, and that's the level of lack of transparency and accountability and just deep corruption at this Public Service Commission. But the system that we have of delegates or candidates, rather, like me and Ms. Waits, having to live in one district, but then it being a statewide race, the result is you have all of these candidates crowded into one district. And it's resulted in not only Republican control, but unanimous Republican control. And so it truly is why I stand with the leaders like Mr. Richard Rose, the president of the Atlanta NAACP, and his lawsuit to try and change that system that we have. And that's the kind of reform that we need to see, because we do not have the representation that we need on the Public Service Commission. It's the only constitutional statewide office where you have to live in a district, but it's a statewide race. It is by design. It's a Jim Crow era law.
Okay. Someone wants to know, will both of your campaigns be visiting the Augusta area before the runoff?
For me, yes, I already have at least 2 groups that I would love to go and visit there. It is a challenge to visit every community. I've been to Savannah and other communities, but it is a challenge. But like I said, with these 5 months, if I'm so lucky as to become the nominee, I would like to visit as many people as I possibly can, because the information and that education component is vital for us to win in November.
And it says specifically the CSRA Augusta area. I'm not sure what that is, Ms. Waits.
I've already begun the process of reaching out to the representatives. You're very familiar with Representative Gloria Frazier, Hardy Davis, the mayor down there. Again, I just think it's important to have those existing relationships where you can pick up the phone. There are a couple of churches down there that I plan to visit. And so I'm excited about that. To Mr. Hubbard's point, literally we're days away from an election. And so at this point, it's going to come down to data, and it's going to come down to ensuring and knowing exactly who voted. And so again, this is the example that I gave you as it relates to the district. When you're running statewide, not being able to focus specifically on the voters that you will be representing, I think does a disservice to the voter. And so I am excited about the fact that we get to travel throughout the state of Georgia to hear what the concerns are in rural Georgia as it relates to broadband, as it relates to the grid, as it relates to a tiered system, because many of them, as you know, have been under assault because they're losing their hospitals, they're losing their infrastructure. So their needs are going to be far greater, and the decisions that we're making here at the local level will have a huge overreaching impact. And so I'm excited to get down to Augusta. I welcome the invitation. I've given out my cell phone, and I'm going to go ahead and put it in the chat again. And there are some smaller communities that have reached. I want to be transparent about this. I have done my best to try to be in as many places as possible. And Mr. Harper can tell you on Saturday there were 5 events. I could only make 3 of them. And so please understand that the fact that you have not seen either one of us, it does not reflect or a lack of commitment on our behalf. It's simply about, getting to as many people as possible. Does that mean that the larger areas, the more populous areas, get a little bit more attention? Sometimes they do. But we are focused on winning statewide. And I think when you go and you look at our numbers, you will see that in terms of the outreach that we have done. I'm super excited about that. And thank you, Millen, Georgia. Thank you for your support.
Can you opt to participate in an EMC versus Georgia Power? And I know you can't, but
in the city of Atlanta?
Period. You can't choose. It depends on where the service areas are. We covered all that already. I just wanted to make sure that
absolutely
the attendee got that answer.
My mom is with Snap and Shows. I've seen her utility bills. I would love to be, to have that access. I spent almost 18 months on the road, and my bill did not change as it relates to my power bill. So clearly we have a problem in Georgia.
And someone asks about the oh, you know what? I told y'all this is my first time on a webinar. I don't have no problem admitting that. And I forgot to hit record. I usually would ask the candidates if they had a problem with it, but I did not hit record. So you're gonna have to share what you remember. And I apologize for that. I really, 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 really do.
Oh my
and I'm
God.
I know it was a good one too. I'm getting some great remarks on here. So at this time, we're going to, I don't see anything that hasn't already been answered or asked rather. Somebody said these are great questions. I'm getting answers, enjoying the questions. I want to give you each a couple of minutes to kind of give us your closing statement, convince us that we need to go to the polls and vote for you. Now, I'm not sure. Wait a minute. Let me see. Oh, Ms. Davenport. I don't know. Did she have a question or something? Dr. Davenport. Okay. Start us off, Ms. Waits. Your 2-minute closing statement.
Thanks so much. I thank you to the organizers who have hosted us tonight. These forums are huge. When you're running statewide, logistically and financially, it's extremely difficult to get a message out. So even though this wasn't recorded and I wanted to share it, I'm happy we had the conversation. And I thank you for hosting not 1, but 2 forums for this particular opportunity. I thank Mr. Hubbard for his work and for his willingness to run for office. This is not easy, and the strain on his family and his children. So one, I want to thank you for that. I believe it's important that we turn the page, that we put Georgia ratepayers and voters first as it relates to the conversation. I have served Georgia for 3 terms in the Georgia General Assembly during some of our most darkest days. I had the pleasure of being elected to the Atlanta City Council, where we got to take on and tackle local issues such as zoning, utilities, public safety, transportation, all different types of things that I believe uniquely qualify me for this opportunity. As it relates to transparency, I believe that we should not take funding from anyone that you regulate or that you have oversight of. I don't think that you can truly have integrity when you are in the pockets to the tune of $500,000 per member of the General Assembly. I thank the other 2 candidates that offered themselves to run in this particular election for their voices and for educating voters. And lastly, no matter who you vote for in this particular race, please show up on Tuesday, July 15th. Please show up in November again, because this will be an opportunity to turn the page. We have a member, Dr. Alicia Johnson, in Savannah, down in District 2, that does not have a primary opposition, but I believe will offer a great opportunity for Georgia to turn the page in terms of ratepayers. I bring the experience, I bring the integrity. I am not a Johnny come lately to this conversation. I am not looking for my first job or my career start. I am not looking to be elected, because I have already been elected, but I am looking to utilize a very, very special skills and the relationships that I've earned throughout the state of Georgia with legislators, with stakeholders, and with community leaders to tackle some of the issues that we're facing. My name is Keisha Shawn Waits. My website is keishawaits.org. I thank you for this opportunity. My cell phone number is 404-538-3479. Feel free to use it, and I look forward to continuing to make myself available to every single voter and ratepayer throughout the state of Georgia. And I thank you for tonight.
All right, we thank you as well. Mr. Hubbard, 2-minute closing statement.
So Representative Taylor and Bishop Mitchell and everyone that helped to organize this, thank you again for the opportunity. I do think that our democracy is strengthened when we have these kinds of discussions. But what I would like to leave you with is that, again, I have been making the efforts to be in front of the Public Service Commission as an energy expert, to channel this focus and energy and this expertise to be able to drive the reforms and the change that we need to see. And the way we do that is by being active, being down there in front of the Public Service Commission, making that case, and obviously showing how we can have that better path, but then taking the next step to become, to have that seat at the table and to use that power for the greater good of Georgians. And so that's what I'm offering, is to channel that expertise and that energy that I bring, the deep experience. As if you visited my website, you'll see that I've thought deeply about how we can do this in a realistic way. I bring the operational excellence of having built lots of projects around the country that will transition us here. I put together these power plans, like I mentioned, in Puerto Rico and many other different communities around the nation. So I have this expertise, this willingness to serve the public and do that in the interests of promoting our community, and especially those, again, who are underserved, who are underrepresented, who are overlooked, and who are suffering the most under these high energy burdens that we can do something about. And so I want to impress upon you that this is a lot of hard work, but it is worth it. The juice is worth the squeeze, because I have a vision for a greater and better Georgia for my 3- and 9-year-old that are just upstairs waiting for me. And I want to do that work for the people of Georgia. And so I thank you for the time, and I hope to serve you.
Thank you both so very, 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 very much. I want to remind everyone that early voting starts Monday, the 7th.
The 7th.
Yes, right after 4th of July. And you check your status at SOS, or either go to My Voter page to determine where you can vote, because early voting locations are not the same locations that you go on election day. And election day happens to be the 15th, which is the following Tuesday. So make your voices heard. I'm going to seek if I can at least, the questions, I don't know what to do about that, but I'll be prepared the next time. Thank you all so much for coming. Yes, Ms. Waits. You're on mute.
Representative, can you mention the MVP site or the I Will Vote site? Because they're going to close a lot of the early voting locations and they'll be restricted statewide. So can you tell people where to find the information to go and vote?
That's what I said, My Voter page.
Oh.
Yeah, My Voter page, Georgia, myvoterpage.georgia.org. And you can, not only can you go, and it's on the flyer, I got it, you can just scan the QR code on the flyer that was promoting this particular forum, but you can not only go and check your status on now you got me saying my MVP, you can also register as well as track your absentee ballot. So make sure that you get your absentee ballot request in by the end of this week in order for your vote to be arrived back to the polling places on time and be counted. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of the week. Thank you all, and best wishes for the rest of this campaign. Don't tire yourself out too much. I know how it is.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.